up.
No, item 3 of...
Sorry. Just psychoactive substances, you know.
I'm happy to move the committee recommendation.
Do I have a seconder for it? Paul Lonsdale. Have we got staff? Yep, thank you, Salmon. Are there any questions of staff that people would like to ask? Andrew, then Vicky.
At the committee meeting, there was some conversation about the likelihood of legal challenge, and we talked about a number of options. We talked about the option that's in the committee recommendation, which extends out to the suburban areas and town centres. We talked about the staff recommendation, which was the central city core and the central city mixed-use areas, and there was also some conversation about the central city core only. Can we just get some comment from staff, please, on the likelihood of legal challenge and the rationale for looking at, in the staff recommendation, the central city core plus the mixed-use areas?
Well, we did consult with MOH. We actually sent the draft policy to MOH and asked for their opinion on whether they felt it was too restrictive. They felt that it wasn't too restrictive, that it would pass. And we did seek legal advice, and the comment was that given that we have to go out for wide community consultation on this draft policy, the assumption is that would certainly minimise the risk to a legal challenge, because you would have a policy which reflected the community view.
Vicky?
Just in terms of the sensitive sites, in, for example, the central city, or in fact anywhere else, but particularly in relation to the central city because there's so little developed in there yet, and there are, for example, at least one new school to go in there and one new childcare centre and probably a number of other sensitive sites.
Yes.
Does any rule that we create, if there is a shop there and then a school establishes, how does it work in relation to that?
Yes, we've asked MOH to clarify that particular issue. Obviously, the current retailers are there on interim licences, and this policy suggests you have a clause which exempts interim licences, from the policy from applying to anyone with an interim licence. But in mid-2015, they'll have to apply for their full full licence, because that's about when Ministry of Health expect to have the regulations in place. So at that point, they will have to apply for full licences. Now, that licence could be for 3 years, but it could be for 5 years. And obviously, at that point, that's when the trigger of this local policy, if it is adopted, would come into play. So unless there was a sensitive site within the 100-metre buffer zone, as we're suggesting, when that full application for a licence is made, they could remain where they were. Now, the issue becomes, well, what if someone comes in after, and 3 years later or 5 years later, they go for their full, they go to, get another licence or to renew their licence? What is the position there? And that's the point that we've asked Ministry of Health to clarify for us. What would that mean? I mean, our assumption is that existing use or would take precedence, but we've asked them to clarify that.
So can I just clarify further? So there are, in the central city, if we limit it to the central city, say, there are planned new schools and planned new preschool centres for the central city. They may not be, or they won't be completed by 2015.
Right.
If the site is known, then do they count as a sensitive site?
Yes, sorry, I don't know the answer to that one. I would have to check with MOH around those sorts of details. I think they're still working through some of those things with these regulations that they've got.
I mean, my view is I suspect not in the way that we have drafted the policy at the moment. It is maybe something that could be something that comes up through submissions and the council decides to amend the policy at the next stage.
If we end up going with just the central city and so little of it is developed, it will become a serious issue. I mean, we know there are these things
Yep.
going in here. There are presumably new mental health facilities and all sorts of things going in there as well. But if we know that, why would we allow something to go in an area where we are establishing a sensitive site?
Yeah. I mean, so two options. Either we go back and we do some further work on the policy to address that issue and bring it back through to the council, or the other option to say is to kind of put out the policy and and you know, I mean, you kind of got to kind of hope that it comes up in submissions to open the door for you to change the policy at the next stage.
If it doesn't,
The policy does have to be reviewed every 5 years.
Yeah, no, I don't think. Again, it would be good if we had some optional legal here, but I don't think it does. But I think we would need a submission to open the door.
Jimmy?
Thank you, Mayor. Two questions. First one, at the moment there have 8 retail premises operating under the interim licenses. 2 in the central city, the Restart, and also in the South City, etc. But the other 6 are spread over in the suburban activity center. Regarding to the maybe the residents' complaint, you know, the structure have any difference or the number have any difference? Do you have this information?
I'm sorry,
I mean, because at the moment, the 8 retail shops running this kind of, you know, to sell this kind of party pills, etc. Whether have any information regarding to the complaint?
How many complaints?
Complaint. How many complaints? How about what kind of content the complaint? And also have any difference between central city and suburban center?
well, I guess the complaints that or the comments that we received when we were doing, some early consultation, was largely focused around the suburban retail outlets rather than the central city retail outlets, and in particular where those retail outlets were located anywhere near a school or a mental health facility. And I don't know if you're aware, but there was a street protest held around one of the locations, probably late last year, I think.
I think there was representation made to the Spladen Heath Community Board as well. I don't know whether one of the 2 councillors there want to comment on.
Phil?
Second
Oh,
question.
sorry, second question.
I'll comment now. That was certainly a very strong silent protest on Lincoln Road.
Yeah.
I've got a question too.
But so did Jim. Sorry, he had a second question.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
Second question is, if the location, this psychoactive policy has been adopted, if in the central city area, but at the moment they have 6 retail shops running their business around the suburban center, whether they are eligible to use the existing rights.
Existing rights of...
The ones that are in the suburban areas, if we bring a central city only policy, do they have existing use rights?
No. Well, no, they won't once they apply for the full licence. While the interim licence regime is in place till about mid-2015, yes, because the policy that we're suggesting exempts interim licences to allow people time to adapt or respond, depending on how it goes. But no, once they applied for the full licence, the local alcohol policy comes into force. Local approved products policy, sorry.
The other lab.
Phil, thank you.
Thank you very much for your report and your work on this. Look, I just wanted to clarify that following the report to Strategy and Planning Committee, just what the staff's original recommendation had been, because my understanding was that would have been, and this is an option clearly for us as council today too, that your recommendation was what's on the map within that sort of greeny coloured area, so it would include the central city mixed use zone. Was that the area which you included in your original staff recommendation?
Yes,
Yeah.
it
It is.
was the
Yeah.
Central City core and Central City mixed business use, which is effectively with the area within the 4 avenues.
Right,
Central
and
City.
you've got that in one of the maps in front of us.
Yep,
So
yep.
thank you, that clarifies that. And so what the strategy and planning committee were recommending is it include the district centres, and that they're the areas marked in purple in the map. So, for example, it would include areas like Addington and Hillmorton and Riccarton.
Correct.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Vicky?
In terms of that Central City and the 4 avenues area, if these have to be a certain distance apart,
Yes.
how many at worst could you fit in the Central City?
Well, I mean, we did sort of, that's why we sort of did the maps in a way, was to look at how realistic the policy was. And you know, on a good day, you could fit 8 in there. Certainly, with 50 metre apart, certainly you can fit 8 in. Even with the 100 metre buffer zone around sensitive sites, it's still possible to fit 8 within that Central City core area. Yes.
Obviously, that's obviously without taking into account what buildings are in
Yes.
those spaces and whether there are retail premises in those and all those sorts of questions, just purely on a space available sort of.
Is it possible within the policy to include known sensitive sites and treat them as though they are sensitive sites? Is
Yeah,
that
the
actually
council could
legally
name
possible?
specific sensitive sites if it wished to do so in the policy. Yep.
Thank you.
Andrew?
So I'd like to move an amendment. I've provided some wording already, and that in fact addresses the question or the point that Councillor Clearwater was making.
Sorry? Oh, you want to move? Yeah. Okay, is there a seconder for that? Phil Clearwater?
So the effect of this is to go back to the staff recommendation?
The effect of this would be to go back to the original staff recommendation, so central city core and city mixed-use zones only, and would exclude the suburbs and town centres. Yep.
So now we're going to debate the amendment, all right? So David East and then Paul Lonsdale. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, okay.
It's more a
Question.
procedural one there, and look, obviously, yeah, happy with this, and Andrew spoke, well, I'm not happy with it, but it's happy for it to be put, but I just wonder from a procedural sort of point of view, would it make more sense for it to be a foreshadowed motion that you would effectively, if you voted against the committee recommendation, then this would be the next, I'm in your hands, but
I think that I think councillors, I mean, the sense that I'm getting is that people would rather vote this up or down, and if that's the case, I mean, then they can go back to the original resolution rather than drop it out and then have people really forced to just accept this one. So I'm going to accept it as an amendment. David East and then Paul Lonsdale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Originally, I did support this notion, but I went with the motion that is on the books at the moment, the substantive motion. And my reasoning for doing that was that I thought that really 2 things. One, concentrating all your outlets in the central city was going to create a huge problem in terms of just focusing everything there. I mean, we've got other issues in the city, and we tend to try and concentrate them. You know, prostitution's all in the city, and we're getting other less desirable activities, and no one wants them in the suburbs. Let's put them in the city. So I also was encouraged by the discussion we had the other day that if we are clever enough with our sensitive areas, we effectively rule out most of the suburban district centres. Most of them are pretty small. You've only got to have a school, a church, a kindergarten, or some other activity that is ruled a sensitive activity. And in fact, I think 3 of the major outlets would drop out straight away were we to adopt a policy that had these sensitive areas. So I'm in favour of the original motion, and I think if anything we need to be more proactive in defining what we call a sensitive area and really sort of nailing down where these areas can establish. So I will be voting against this amendment and going to the original motion that the Strategy and Planning Committee passed the other day.
Paul?
I'd just like to say that the central city, as we know, has been extremely badly damaged. We're trying to rebuild this thing. We are wanting 30,000 people, residents, living in the central city. Residents are suburban people. They will treat this as a suburban area with a city core attached to it, much like Riccarton has a far bigger developed area than actually the central city currently. So I support the original amendment. I think it's important that we do actually develop a really clear policy around the sensitive sites. We have unfortunately been lumbered with this whole thing. This is the government has legalised these products. We've been left to try and manage it. And by adopting this policy doesn't mean we endorse this, the substance sales. It means that we've got to try and manage it as best as we can. And also concentrating in a small area. And I've seen the change myself personally with the Restart Mall. I've seen the change since the R18 has come in. It has shrunk the outlets considerably to down to 8, and there was plenty more that used to sell it. So you've seen a concentration of the problems around these sites. If you put it all in one area, that problem is going to be huge. And that is my concern for the city centre, which is trying to get itself back on its feet with 30,000 residents in that area in the coming years. We want to make sure that we provide a place that people will want to rebuild in and they'll want to live in. Notwithstanding, we've got to actually fix this problem. And it is a big problem, much like alcohol. But as I say, I ask you to support the First Amendment. Let's make sure we develop a really keen policy around the sensitive sites. And as David pointed out, it will eliminate currently under the sensitive sites that we've seen here, 3 of them out of the 8. And if we include a few more that we define as sensitive sites, we might find we restrict this down to a very small amount of places these things can go.
Andrew?
Thank you. This is clearly a debate where there are some very differing views, and certainly we've heard from the people that came to talk to us this morning, and we've talked about protests in the community and so on, and clearly it's an area which is quite contentious. And I think it's absolutely important that we get this right. And the reason I raised this amendment today is that I want the ability for the council to, the full council, to take a position on this that may in fact end up being different than the committee's position. And this is all about, of course, what we go out in a draft policy for consultation to the community with. And I think I'm getting a sense from what's been said so far, and certainly from what was said in the committee, that our intention is to restrict this so that it's manageable. From an enforcement and policing point of view, in my view, having the activity concentrated in the one place makes the enforcement and policing much easier. From a point of view of effects on our communities, permitting this activity in low socioeconomic areas, areas where the commercial situation is perhaps a little bit different. There are shopping areas that are perhaps in need of revitalisation that this sort of activity won't help. The rents, of course, are cheaper in the suburban areas and the town centres than they are in the city centre. And my belief is that the higher rents and the better policing and the type of development there's going to be in the city centre may in fact preclude some of this activity. From my own point of view, the town centres of Littleton and Akaroa would be included in this, and I know that the communities in my ward would not be comfortable with this type of activity going on there, and I'm sure there would be other councillors that would express similar views of the activity going on in suburban centres in their ward. My belief is that this is the last type of thing we need to be allowing in the suburban areas. Now, there have been comments about the exclusion zones. And of course there are considerations around whether this is likely to happen or not. Would such a business actually open up in Akaroa? and chances are it probably wouldn't. But that's not, in fact, a reason for permitting it to and letting market forces run their course. And I also don't believe that we should be saying, well, we should allow this in the suburban areas because there are sufficient exclusion zones that there would only be very few places where it could happen. If our communities are not comfortable with this activity in the suburban areas, if we don't believe there could be sufficient control in the suburban areas, then I believe that this is our opportunity to go out with a draft policy that reflects that. I'm very concerned about the effect, and we heard some of them this morning from the people that came to talk to us, of these particular substances. My own motivation is to minimise that as much as possible, and I think by restricting to the central city areas only, that's one way we can do that very effectively. And just as a point of clarification, I would refer councillors to the two maps. Attachment 3, option 2, which is the one that shows the suburban areas, which in fact are quite widespread around the city, and attachment 5, option 1, the central city core and the areas in yellow, which by their very nature, particularly when you take the exclusion areas into account, are really quite restrictive. So the reason I put up the amendment today is purely and simply to allow us to do the minimum that we need to do to avoid legal challenge in the face of quite a difficult situation we've been placed in as a result of legislation. I certainly wouldn't want to see the proliferation of these stores be any more widespread than they need to be.
Jamie?
I will stand for this one, but it's we've had an interesting debate on this. We had an interesting debate on this at my committee last week, and we obviously reached a recommendation that was the committee recommendation that you see. So I'm going to speak to this as a whole because I think that makes sense. It will be speaking to saying why I don't support the amendment and why I support the committee recommendation that we reached last week. I'm going to make this really, really clear. I want to reduce harm with psychoactive substances. In my view, they are really, really insidious things. It's taken a real toll on our community. So please do understand where I'm coming from with this. I want to reduce harm around the psychoactive substances. I've learned a few things in my baptism by fire on council, and some the hard way. And one of them has been that if you want to reduce harm around something, I have seen this happen time and time again, and it is from experience that I've come to this position, which I'm hoping that I can convince you then to vote against this amendment, because I think we all want the same outcome. We all do want to reduce harm around this insidious stuff. But I've found that you have two options. You can concentrate something, or you can water something down. And watering it down is what I have found in my experience to reduce the harm. So I see with something like this, there's a wee thing called supply and demand, and that's not going to change. You've got 8 places that can have a viable business by selling this stuff. Whatever the size of the area is irrelevant. If you stop it and say you can't do it in the suburban centres, hey, it'll still probably go on. You'll just push it underground. You won't be able to have your checks and balances. You won't be able to police it. It's going to be sold effectively on the black market there because they're not going to necessarily stop. But if you water it down and have it wide, those 8 can either be on a pinhead or those 8 can be spread across the city. And I think that that is by far the better option. You're looking confused there, Vicky. And is there any limit to it? No, I'm just saying that simple supply and demand, they can go wherever they like right now, and you've got supply and demand saying that 8 places will have sprouted up. There are 8 places that sell this right now. So if you say you can operate in a small defined area, you'll put those 8 into that small defined area, and I believe it is far more visible and it becomes far more of a problem. If you have a wider area, which I think there are benefits around because it does water this down, you have those 8 spread across a far, far wider area. I support going down this route because I think watering it down is by far the better option because I want to reduce the harm around this. I think the other point around this too is that a little thing called legal challenge, and I hate going down this road, and I'll make a prediction with you, but Hamilton have taken quite a severe approach and they've said, I'm sorry, it just can't go on here. In my opinion, my prediction is that that'll get quashed. I think that it will be challenged, and I think Hamilton will lose, and it will cost a lot of time and a lot of money. You have to be reasonable about this. I don't necessarily back this, but the government has said it's legal, okay? And then they've given us a series of tools to try and police it. So from us to be able to regulate this, I think having a wider area basically says, do you know what? Not everyone actually does do all their business in the central city. There are suburban areas, and this recognises that. You can operate there, but there are a number of checks and balances which you have to adhere to. And by doing that, I believe that significantly reduces the chance of a successful legal challenge. Whereas because currently you've got 6 of the 8 places outside of the central city. The vast majority are not actually wanting to be there anyway. They're operating in the suburban areas. So I think watering it down is by far the better option. I think watering it down is what is better for our community because it reduces the visibility of it and it spreads it well out, which I think is a preferable way to go. And I think that it significantly reduces the chance of a successful legal challenge. So I'm going to be voting against the amendment there because I believe that, in my experience, that is the best way, in all honesty, hand on heart, to reduce the harm caused by this insidious product. So I'll be voting against the amendment and going with my committee's recommendation. Thanks.
Phil?
Well, I'm certainly strongly supporting the amendment. I agree with Councillor Lonsdale regarding the government legislation, but and unfortunately, it's clearly just while it's aimed to solve the drug problem, it's totally backfired, and it certainly has in many of our areas. But I cannot agree though with Councillor Lonsdale and Councillor Goff regarding watering down or kind of like dispersing the problem as if that's going to dilute it. Quite frankly, the whole purpose of this is how we contain the issue. And police enforcement has been referred to, and clearly it's easier to enforce a limited area than to have the stuff covering the whole city. I'm particularly concerned because in our report there's very clear evidence from the health experts of the huge problems the synthetic cannabis causes. And like in my own area, and the irony is that it's purple on the map, where we've got 3 mental health organisations, Hillmorton Hospital and Comcare, and we've also got the Bridge Centre at the Salvation Army, who all intervene with drug problems. And right beside Comcare, we've got one of these shops right now selling this stuff. And the community development officer in the area, she certainly tells me that what literally happens is adults are buying the stuff, yes, over 18, taking it to their cars, and they're giving it to their kids. Now, we do not want that happening in our suburbs. Alongside, on Lincoln Road too, we're not far from it, we've got Hagley Community College, we've also got our own social housing in the area, and we've got an early childhood centre. So I just think that, and there was a very strong silent protest in Addington, and there's no way that I'm going to go back to the people who elected me and say, look, it's okay to trial this stuff or set up shops in our area. So I'm certainly strongly supporting the amendment.
Glenn? It's Glenn and then Ray.
Thank you. I wish to support this. Sorry, have I jumped the gun?
Yeah, no, you haven't.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right, I wish to support this amendment. We've heard a lot today about community, and we're going to continue hearing a lot about today and our community today and how we, through our decisions, can help to build up our communities, which need building up, especially at this time. I think about you, Brighton. I think about what it in fact actually is a playground, in my view, where I've seen little children play outside the store in the mall. That place has become a scourge in the community. It has a central location. We all know where it is, in my view. It is undermining our sense of community, the very thing which we are endeavouring to build in a badly hit part of the city. It lures our youth in. And if anyone can give me an answer to how do these stores add value to building up our communities, you will have won me over. I support this amendment that these stores are better able to be managed in the CBD, and I'm actually quite confident in going out with this position.
Ref?
Right. I don't support this amendment. And again, like Jamie says, I mean, these are filthy products, but unfortunately the government has legalised them. There's not a lot we can do about that. The problem with the supporters of this is their logic is flawed, because if you think that putting a couple of shops into the central city is going to solve the problem, it isn't. It would be a little bit like saying there's only going to be 2 pubs in the whole of Christchurch, and anyone who wants a drink has to go into the city to have it. So If we look at the amount of harm in our community, a lot of it is coming from alcohol, and we have pubs and wine bars everywhere. You can buy alcohol everywhere around the city. Now, I'm not seeing any proposals to shut that down. I think as one of the deputies came in today and said, I mean, this is ultimately an issue of parenting. It's an issue of education. That is the only way you're ever going to solve these types of problems. At the moment, we've got 8 stores here. There's lots of regulations around where stores can go. It's very unlikely that there's going to be a huge increase in stores around the city. And I think actually we need to be focusing much more on education, parental education, to stop these types of things happening. I mean, we know that kids can get alcohol very easily under 18. It's probably a lot harder for them to get this stuff. So I think, you know, trying to shovel it all into the central city is not actually going to solve your problem. So that's what I would say.
Vicky? Jimmy?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to talk, but I have to, you know. Just want to let you know. Yeah. Because this draft policy actually is respond to the government's act, the Psychoactive Substances Act 2013. And this act has been commenced on 18th of July last year. And the main purpose, we are all aware, actually is to protect the health, also minimize the harm to individuals who use psychoactive products. If council, you know, in this special conservative procedure, in the initial stage, open the space to the citywide, my particular concern probably to mislead, misunderstand for the community, for the people, especially probably for all those teenagers, whether they thought, oh, council encourage rather than discourage, then would like to assess these premises to use more the party pills, more the energy pills, or the herbal, the high, etc. And also, I was told, you know, in New Zealand, even we have only $4.2 million, but addict drugs, this kind of the party pills is high percentage in worldwide. The youth, the teenager, actually, you know, is the possession, is asset to the New Zealand. You know, we need to be aware to protect their individual health, to minimize, you know, this harm to their everyone. That's most the important. Yeah, if you open the wider the space, you just give them the opportunity to access. Because even in Hornby area, I live in Hornby area for 18 years. Even Hornby area, one of the shop, you know, my understanding, in a long time period, the community, the local MP, individual, strong against to set up a shop in that area. But in that time, because the act is not yet commenced. So why we council need to take this opportunity to, in conjunction with the government act, to minimize this harm to those teenagers. So my personal view, staff, the original recommendation is very, very reasonable, you know, in restrict to the central city core and also central city mixed use area. And also I ask staff, you know, one question, whether there's any difference between current interim license to in central city and suburban. Staff reply, I think probably you already heard. In suburban area, more complaint, but never heard in central city. So this is the signal, this is the message, you know, give us the practical reference. So I urge all those who like to support committee recommendation, please rethink about it, change your vote. Thank you.
Vicky?
The issue I have with this is that these are unknown, untested substances that we are allowing to be put into the young adolescent brains. And I find that scary, actually. I don't buy the argument at all that somehow by putting it into the suburbs, we dilute the problem. if you look at the map here, there are potentially 30 suburban sites that would support one of these things. The fact that there are 8 at the moment does not mean that the industry will be limited to 8 sites, because it is a very profitable industry. So there are potentially 30 sites if you look at the map, and then another potential 8 in the central city. So the choice for us is that we have 8 in the central city or 38 in the city. And if I have to make that choice, I will make the choice to confine it to the central city, to try to diminish the number of sites. I would very happily take a test case on this and try and diminish it much further, but I appreciate the amendment that is there before us. I do not buy the argument that parental education will solve this problem. Part of these problems are design problems. If you put these things in the way, people will use untested, untried, harmful substances that they really don't know the impact of in their particular brain, particularly in an adolescent brain. It's dangerous. We have a sinking lid on gaming machines because we recognise the social harm. We are going to have a local alcohol policy because we recognise the social harm. We recognise that these substances create and can create, perhaps differently for everyone, social harm. We don't know the impact of these things. And therefore, I want a clear policy that attempts, no matter what, to limit that social harm. I would actually go further than your amendment, but I'm fine with what's put up there because I appreciate that there will be legal challenges. But I think we have to, as a community, it is never true to say that just parents raise children. A whole village raises the children in this village, and we absolutely need to be clear about what we're doing by way of social harm to members of our community. So I'm very happy to support this amendment.
Right, well, I will put the amendment. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. I think that's carried. And Councillor Goff and Manji were the only... and David East, so there's 3. Oh, and 4, and Paul Lonsdale. So the 4 to be recorded. Thank you. Sorry? Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, yep.
This is for the amendment, right?
Councillor Chen, could you vote on the amendment? Yes. You need to vote. So I declare the motion carried. So
just before you move on, we probably then need to bring the correct statement of proposal back to the next council meeting. Right. The statement of proposal you've got now is the wrong one. So we'll do that through to the next meeting.
Can I ask also if it's possible for you to look at known potential sensitive sites and whether they can be included in the central city area? Thanks.
Okay, so that the whole motion now can't be put because it would require some wording to be changed on the... Okay, so could I have a motion to refer it to the next council meeting, refer the matter for the next council meeting where the updated policy statement of proposal will be addressed. So that's Phil Clearwater, Glenn Livingston.
This is perfectly normal. So what I can't understand is, can we not just delegate this to the acting chief executive to finalise the statement of proposal based on the amendment? I just can't see. You look at the agenda today, we've got so many things on our agendas. Just adding something seems crazy. What is it that you need from us?
Can I just say that we're entering into a legal process? It now has to go out for public submission. I don't want to get tripped up on a legal process issue at this stage. So I'd like to trust the advice that I'm getting from the end of the table and say, and accept the resolution that we have moved by Councillor Clearwater, seconded by Councillor Livingston, that this matter be referred to the next council meeting where an amended statement of proposal will be addressed. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. The last item of business on this agenda is the committee, and on this particular committee, is in relation to freedom camping and